Hidden in the jungles of Vietnam lies one of the most shocking, least understood truths of the war. Every single American firebase was eventually overrun. It's a staggering record of collapse that rewrites what we thought we knew about U.S. strategy. And at the heart of this unraveling was one of the most ambitious and most disastrous military doctrines ever attempted: search and destroy. American bases overrun, entire strongholds swallowed in fire and chaos, with hundreds killed, helicopters shot from the sky, and whole garrisons erased in a single night. More than a dozen times, U.S. firebases fell in blood-soaked sieges. Why would the world's most powerful military build hundreds of positions it couldn't hold? And here's the question you may already be asking: was this failure inevitable? Or was there another path, one that could have spared lives, saved resources, and perhaps even changed the war's outcome? Welcome to iRich History. Tonight, we journey into the struggles of past wars, the battles and sacrifices that helped shape America, here on our Empire of Liberty episode. But before we proceed, let me ask you, where are you tuning in from? If you carry a memory, a family story, or even a link that ties you to this era of the Vietnam War, I'd love for you to share it in the comments. Your voice helps keep this history alive. And don't forget to subscribe to iRich History, because tomorrow I've got something truly special waiting for you. Soon after American combat troops arrived in Vietnam, a fierce debate over strategy began. One camp argued that U.S. forces should focus on protecting major cities, only deploying to rural areas when enemy forces concentrated to fight local troops. Under this approach, American aid would prioritize building economic infrastructure and strengthening local militias. The opposing view favored a broad strategy of securing all of South Vietnam with hundreds of American bases. This search and destroy approach was chosen, largely because most U.S. generals preferred offensive operations. But each new base demanded clean water, electricity, constant security, and steady resupply. That meant protecting roads and bridges, clearing mines, running weekly convoys, and flying frequent helicopter missions. The effort consumed vast resources, scattered American forces, created vulnerable targets, and alienated civilians with combat operations that caused widespread death and destruction. Small American bases relied on artillery, which allowed them to cover their own area and support nearby outposts. With terrain advantages and heavy firepower, they could unleash devastating attacks within minutes, repelling hundreds of enemy assaults. Yet these same bases were vulnerable to surprise attacks, which required constant patrols. Those patrols, in turn, exposed U.S. forces to ambushes and mines. On several occasions, the enemy massed quickly and succeeded in overrunning American strongholds. At Dong Xoai in June 1965, more than 1,000 enemy troops attacked a strategic base defended by 400 South Vietnamese soldiers with U.S. Special Forces advisors and American air power. Another 500 soldiers were flown in by helicopter, but many were cut down in the landing zones. The base was eventually overrun, with 20 Americans killed in combat and helicopter crashes, while 13 others went missing. At A Shao in March 1966, 4 enemy battalions attacked a Special Forces camp near the Cambodian border. It was defended by 400 local troops and 17 Americans. After 2 days of brutal fighting, surviving Americans evacuated by helicopter alongside some local troops, leaving behind 8 Americans dead and 5 missing. Most local defenders surrendered or fled. During air support, 4 U.S. aircraft were shot down, and 7 more Americans were killed. At Lang Vei in February 1968, enemy forces used light tanks to overrun a heavily defended Special Forces camp. Despite strong American artillery and air support, most of the 500 Montagnard mercenaries defending the base were killed. American losses were 7 killed, 11 wounded, and 3 captured. At Lima Site 85, the U.S. Air Force had secretly built a radar navigation station atop a remote mountain in Laos to guide bombing missions north. Enemy forces discovered the site and prepared to destroy it. Although Americans knew an attack was imminent, they delayed evacuation to keep the station running. In March 1968, the site was overrun. 6 Americans escaped by helicopter, but 13 were killed, along with 42 CIA-backed mercenary soldiers. In May 1968, an enemy battalion struck an old French fort manned by 150 Chinese mercenaries, 8 U.S. Special Forces soldiers, and 33 U.S. Marines with 2 howitzers. Helicopters flew in 45 Marine reinforcements and evacuated casualties during a fierce, day-long battle. Eventually, the base was abandoned in chaos, with survivors fleeing aboard helicopters, some clinging to the landing skids. The battle left 32 Americans dead and several helicopters destroyed. That same month at Nui Ba Den, 100 enemy sappers staged a surprise nighttime assault on an American communications station atop the mountain. The base was swiftly overrun and burned. 24 Americans were killed, 35 wounded, and 2 captured. Survivors hid in bunkers or among boulders until daybreak. The speed of the assault left many men defenseless, leading some to call it a massacre. At Kham Duc in May 1968, a large Special Forces camp collapsed despite reinforcement from an American infantry battalion. Hundreds of local civilians and militia were left behind as U.S. troops evacuated by helicopters and C-130S. 9 aircraft were shot down, and 35 Americans were killed or captured. At LZ Loon in June 1968, U.S. Marines established a fire base on Hill 672. Enemy forces responded with a battalion-sized assault. After a day of bloody combat, nearly half the Marines were casualties. Commanders ordered evacuation, leaving behind most of the dead. 1 helicopter was shot down during the extraction. The battle cost 41 Marines dead and over 100 wounded. At LZ East in June 1969, enemy forces overran the outpost, killing 17 soldiers from the 196th Infantry Brigade and wounding 34 before reinforcements arrived to retake the base. At Firebase Tomahawk in June 1969, an enemy attack destroyed the position manned by a Kentucky National Guard artillery battery. 4 howitzers and all ammunition were lost. 13 Americans were killed and 50 wounded. At Firebase Kate in September 1969, 30 Americans and 156 Montagnard mercenaries set up a base near the Cambodian border, without road access and beyond artillery support. After a month-long siege, constant shelling forced evacuation. Resupply by helicopter ended, and defenders destroyed their artillery before retreating. Nearly half the garrison was killed or wounded. At Firebase Rifle on February 11, 1970, mortar and rocket barrages preceded an enemy assault that quickly overran the base. 11 Americans and dozens of local troops were killed, and the 2 howitzers destroyed. At Firebase Henderson in May 1970, enemy sappers stormed the hilltop, killing 27 soldiers from the 101st Division and wounding 40. Satchel charges destroyed the artillery before the attackers withdrew. At Firebase Mary Ann in March 1971, 50 enemy sappers infiltrated at night using satchel charges, tear gas, and fire. In a 45-minute rampage, 33 Americans were killed and 83 wounded. An investigation later found discipline lax and security inadequate. The brigade commander was relieved of duty, and the firebase was closed. At Firebase Ripcord in July 1971, an enemy division surrounded and bombarded the remote position. U.S. generals decided to evacuate. Over 23 days, 4 American battalions fought their way out under constant attack. 75 Americans were killed, 463 wounded, and dozens of helicopters shot down or damaged. All artillery and heavy equipment were left behind. Although many of these bases were later retaken by American forces, others were permanently abandoned. By 1975, every U.S. base built in Vietnam had been overrun. In hindsight, the alternative strategy of defending cities alone might have saved countless American lives and resources, easing domestic pressure for withdrawal. Yet in reality, the outcome may not have changed. The Vietnamese had been fighting for independence for a century, and in the end, the American people grew weary of defending what was, in effect, a colony called South Vietnam. The strategy ultimately did not matter because the Vietnam War was lost before American combat forces even arrived. In the end, the contrast is haunting. America built fire bases to project strength, yet one by one they became symbols of fragility, swallowed by the very war they were meant to control. The tragedy is not just in the loss of men, machines, and ground, but in the lesson ignored. That overwhelming firepower cannot secure victory if the strategy itself is flawed. And so we're left with the uncomfortable question, was search and destroy merely a failed tactic, or was it proof that the war was unwinnable from the start? Could a different path have spared lives, or was the fall of every base inevitable, written long before the first American boots touched Vietnamese soil? That is the journey we've traveled tonight, a journey through courage, collapse, and costly illusions. It is worth remembering because every firebase overrun was more than a military defeat. It was another step toward a reckoning America has never fully resolved. So here's the controversy I leave with you. Did America lose Vietnam because of bad strategy, or because no strategy could ever win it?